Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time. Way back, to a world where a hot bath was a once-a-month luxury and the concept of a flush toilet was still about 800 years in the future. We're going to pull back the velvet curtains on the medieval royal court. Not to glorify the knights and the feasts, but to whisper about the grimy, uncomfortable, and frankly, kind of gross parts of their daily lives. You're not just going to visit, you're going to live it. You're going to feel the damp stone of the castle walls, smell the wood smoke mixed with unwashed wool, and maybe even get a whiff of the latrine pit. Just a heads up, if you were royalty back then, you probably wouldn't survive your first week. The germs alone would take you down. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Alright, so you've just arrived at your castle. Your royal carriage, more of a bumpy wooden box on wheels, has finally stopped. And you're being helped down. The first thing that hits you isn't the majesty of the stone walls, but the smell. It's a complex bouquet of things you'd rather not think about. There's the pervasive scent of wood smoke from the hearths, the livestock in the courtyard below, and an underlying, unmistakable odor of human and animal waste. Sanitation, as you know it, simply does not exist. The notion of cleanliness is a deeply personal and, frankly, optional choice. You're likely wearing the same wool tunic you've been in for days, maybe even weeks. Your hands feel sticky. You remember seeing a page boy empty a chamber pot from an upper window directly onto the ground outside. You just hope no one is walking there. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact. Most medieval castles lacked any form of internal plumbing or dedicated waste disposal beyond the simple, unlined garderobe chutes or privy towers that emptied into a moat or a designated pit. It's not a pretty thought, is it? You might think that being a king or queen would grant you immunity from this squalor. Not so. In fact, your high status might make it even worse in some respects, as you'd be surrounded by more people, all contributing to the general miasma. Imagine a great hall packed with 100 courtiers, all of them having spent the day riding or working, all of them without the benefit of soap or deodorant. The air is thick. You're told that your personal bath is being prepared. This isn't a quick shower, it's a monumental event. A large wooden tub is brought into your chamber, and your servants spend hours hauling buckets of hot water from the kitchen fires to fill it. It's a production, not a daily routine. This could happen maybe once a month if you're lucky, or even less frequently during a long journey. But let's talk about a quirky tidbit. Did you know that some people in the Middle Ages believed that bathing was actually unhealthy? There was a fringe theory that hot water opened up the pores of the skin, making you more susceptible to disease. So, in their minds, staying a little bit grimy was a form of self-preservation. It's a good excuse, I guess, for not wanting to haul all that water. Now, if you wanted to freshen up, you'd use a linen cloth dipped in rosewater or vinegar. It's a temporary fix, but it's better than nothing, and it at least helps mask that particular ode to medieval nobility scent. You'd also be advised to wash your hands before and after meals. But don't expect a lot of hand sanitizer stations around the Great Hall. Historians still argue whether the general filth and lack of hygiene were the primary drivers of the widespread diseases that plagued medieval life, or if they were merely a contributing factor to issues like poor nutrition and a lack of medical knowledge. It's a chicken and egg kind of situation. Did the open sewers make everyone sick? Or was everyone just sick anyway, and the open sewers didn't help? You'll probably never know for sure. But as you walk through your new home, stepping carefully to avoid the worst of the puddles, you're inclined to believe the former. You're a person of power, a king or a queen. But in this moment, you're just a person trying not to get a foot infection from walking on a floor that's seen more things than you'd like to imagine. The reality is, even at the very top of the social pyramid, the basic, day-to-day comforts you take for granted are completely out of reach. As you settle into your new royal quarters, the reality of life inside the castle walls continues to set in. You thought the courtyard was chilly? Wait until you're inside. The massive stone walls, impressive as they are completely uninsulated. The great halls are cavernous, and the windows, if they exist at all, are often just unglazed openings in the wall. maybe with some oiled parchment or thin shutters to keep out the worst of the rain and wind. As a result, drafts are a constant, unwelcome guest. You feel a persistent chill on the back of your neck, no matter where you sit. This isn't just uncomfortable, it's a physical, bone-deep cold that seems to follow you everywhere. The solution is fire, of course. But the huge fireplaces in the hall are notoriously inefficient. Most of the heat shoots right up the chimney, leaving the far corners of the room in a state of perpetual goosebumps. A mainstream historical fact is that while large fireplaces were a central feature of medieval halls, they often did little to warm the entire space, leading to people clustering tightly around the hearth for warmth. It's a bit like trying to heat a gymnasium with a single campfire. You're shown to your royal bedchamber, and you're hoping for a soft, warm sanctuary. You might be disappointed. The beds themselves are often enormous, four-postered affairs, but their grandeur is mostly for show. The mattresses are typically stuffed with straw or feathers, which can be lumpy and can also be home to a whole ecosystem of unwelcome critters. You notice the bed linens are thick and heavy, designed to trap what little body heat you generate. But you can also see small black specks moving around. Oh, those are fleas. They're everywhere. They'll live in your clothes, in the straw of your mattress, and on the backs of the castle dogs. It's a quirky tidbit, but some people, even royalty, would wear a small pouch of herbs, like lavender or wormwood, tied to their belts, believing the strong smell would repel fleas. Spoiler alert, it mostly didn't work. The fleas were just a part of life. Like taxes and bad weather, you'd spend a surprising amount of your morning scratching. An undignified start to a day of ruling. Your chamber is also a hive of activity. Unlike a modern bedroom, it's not a private retreat. Your servants are constantly coming and going. Pages are laying out your clothes. A fire is being stoked, and guards are posted outside the door. There's no such thing as alone time. Even when you're in bed, there might be courtiers on a dais nearby, waiting for an audience or just there to be present. You'd think the king or queen would get some privacy, right? But the constant presence of others was seen as a mark of your status and importance. The more people around you, the more powerful you were. It's a bit like having a reality show crew with you 24/7. Imagine trying to get a good night's sleep with all that. As you prepare for the night, wrapped in layers of wool and furs, you realize the castle is a place of constant noise. There are the sounds of footsteps on stone, the clanking of armor in the guards' quarters, the howling of the wind through the window slits, and the distant snoring of your chamberlain. Historians still argue whether the constant lack of quiet and privacy contributed to the mental and physical health issues that plagued many medieval rulers. Were they just stressed out by the job, or was the perpetual chaos of their living quarters a major factor? You're starting to lean toward the latter. The grandeur is there, of course. The tapestries on the walls are beautiful, woven with scenes of mythical beasts and heroic battles. But they can't block out the chill or the noise. As you lie down on your lumpy, flea-infested mattress, you realize that for all the gold and glory, you're just a person trying to stay warm and get some rest in a very uncomfortable, very public stone box. Sweet dreams, right? Waking up is just another step into the day's peculiar realities. You're shivering, but also oddly itchy from the fleas. It's time for your first meal, and your stomach is rumbling. So you head to the Great Hall, following the scent of roasting meat. The medieval diet of the royal court is, to put it mildly, heavy on the animal products. A mainstream historical fact is that the diet of the nobility was overwhelmingly protein-rich, featuring a wide variety of meats and game, while vegetables were often viewed with suspicion or were simply unavailable to the upper classes. You're seated at the high table, a piece of dark, hard bread in front of you. This isn't the fluffy white bread you might be used to, it's a dense, rye-based loaf that serves as both food and, surprisingly, a plate. This is called a trencher. It absorbs the juices and sauces from your food, and when you're done, you either eat the soggy trencher, a bit like eating a wet cracker, or, more likely, give it to a servant or the dogs. Today's feast looks impressive. There's venison, a whole roasted boar, and a roasted peacock. Oh, and look at that. A swan. Serving a roasted swan was a symbol of immense wealth and status. A quirky tidbit that shows just how far the nobility would go to flaunt their power. They'd even redress the bird in its own feathers after it was cooked. so it looked magnificent and a little bit creepy. Your meal is a procession of rich, fatty meats, heavily spiced to mask the fact that they've been sitting out all morning. There are no forks, of course. You'll be using a knife to cut and your fingers to eat. Etiquette dictates you should only use 3 fingers, which seems like a bit of a challenge, but you do your best. You're constantly wiping your hands on a nearby piece of cloth or, if you're feeling less formal, on your clothing. Now, where are the vegetables? You won't find many. There's a reason for this. Most vegetables were associated with peasant food. If you were eating cabbage or onions, it meant you were poor. The exceptions were things like peas and beans. But even those weren't the stars of the show. Fruits, too, were a mixed bag. Some, like apples and pears, were common, but others were rare and highly valued. And fresh produce? Forget about it. Everything is preserved, either through salting, drying, or pickling. So, you're eating a lot of salt and not a lot of fiber. This, as you can imagine, leads to its own set of gastrointestinal issues. It's a bit of a running joke. Really, the amount of indigestion a medieval noble probably had. But what about drinks? You're not going to be drinking water. The water sources are often contaminated, as we learned in section 1. Instead, you'll be drinking ale or wine. Even the children drink watered-down versions of these. The fermentation process killed off a lot of the nasty bacteria, making them a much safer choice. You've just taken a sip of your ale, which is thick and a bit cloudy, and you're already feeling a little sleepy. A lot of these brews had a very low alcohol content, but when it's all you drink, it adds up. You're starting to feel the day's fatigue and the heavy food weighing you down. Historians still argue whether the consistent consumption of low-alcohol beverages contributed to the generally lower energy levels and sedentary lifestyle of the nobility, or if that was simply a byproduct of a life with so few physical demands and so much rich food. You might not be able to answer that, but you can definitely feel the effects of this diet. You're full, but not in a healthy, satisfying way. It's a heavy, slightly bloated sensation that tells you the afternoon nap is coming soon. Now that you've survived breakfast, it's time to tackle the day's tasks, which for a young royal means learning. Your education isn't about sitting in a classroom with a chalkboard. Oh no, it's a hands-on, very practical, and often quite boring affair designed to prepare you for the singular job of ruling. A mainstream historical fact is that the education of medieval royalty was a mix of academic, military, and practical skills, tailored to prepare them for their future roles as leaders and figureheads. You're not just a student, you're an apprentice to the most important job in the kingdom. The morning might start with your tutor, a high-ranking cleric or a scholar. He'll likely be teaching you Latin. Why Latin? It's the language of the church and of international diplomacy. Every important document, every treaty, every religious text is written in Latin. You'll be poring over manuscripts, the words scrawled in an elegant but difficult-to-read hand. You're expected to memorize long passages of scripture and history. It's tedious work, and the light from the small, high windows is poor, making it even harder on your eyes. You're told that this is just the beginning. You'll also need to learn to read and write in your native language, though that's often considered less important. The focus is on the language of power, not the language of the people. After your academic lessons, it's time to move on to the more kingly or queenly skills. For a young prince, this means military training. You'll be practicing with a wooden sword, learning the footwork and the blows, and you'll start to get a feel for the weight of the armor you'll one day wear. For a young princess, your education might focus more on managing the household, the court, and, importantly, the complex art of needlework. You might also be taught the fine art of diplomacy and negotiation, skills that will be crucial for securing alliances and navigating the treacherous waters of court politics. But the most enjoyable part of your education is likely to be the falconry. A quirky tidbit about royal education is that training in hunting with falcons was considered an essential skill for both princes and princesses. It was seen as a way to learn discipline, patience, and control, all qualities a good ruler should possess. You'd spend hours with your falconer, learning to handle the hooded bird, to feed it, and to send it soaring into the sky to hunt for game. There's a certain thrill in watching the bird dive, and for a moment, you forget the itchy wool clothing and the musty smell of the castle. It's a reminder that even in this serious, duty-filled life, there are moments of beauty and connection to nature. It was also, let's be honest, just a lot of fun. Historians still argue whether the narrow, highly specialized education of medieval royalty made them effective rulers, or if it left them unprepared for the more complex economic and social issues of their time. Did their focus on war and piety blind them to the needs of their subjects? It's a complex question, and as you're practicing your Latin declensions, you might wonder if all this is really preparing you for what's to come. You might also be thinking about how different this is from the education you're used to. No math classes, no science labs, no art history. It's all about the job. All the time. The weight of your future is already on your young shoulders. After your morning lessons and training, it's time to prepare for the day's various courtly duties. Which means getting dressed. This isn't just a matter of pulling on some clothes, it's a process. A statement, and a bit of a sensory assault. You're being dressed by several servants, who are pulling and tugging at heavy fabrics. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval royal fashion was defined by layers, rich materials, and highly impractical designs that were meant to display wealth and status rather than provide comfort or ease of movement. You're wearing a linen undertunic, which feels soft enough, but over that comes a heavy wool tunic, and then a surcoat made of silk or velvet, maybe even trimmed with ermine or other precious furs. It's a lot, and it's heavy. You feel a bit like you're wearing a blanket. The colors of your clothing are also a big deal. You're wearing deep purples, vibrant reds, or shimmering blues. These colors were incredibly difficult and expensive to produce, often requiring dyes made from exotic insects or plants, which were then imported from far away. A quirky tidbit about this is that the vibrant red dye, known as cochineal, came from a beetle that had to be crushed to produce the color. It took thousands of these tiny creatures to dye a single piece of cloth. It was a gruesome, expensive process, and wearing that color was a way of saying, I am a very big deal. You might also be wearing gold or silver thread woven into the fabric, which catches the light and adds to the weight. Now, let's talk about the shoes. You're trying to walk in them, but they're a bit of a challenge. They're often made of thin leather, and the fashionable ones have long, pointed toes that curve upward. These are called poulaines. The length of the point was a sign of your status, the longer the toe, the more important you were. So, as a royal, your poulaines are probably ridiculously long. You have to be careful not to trip over them. It's a bit like trying to walk in clown shoes, but with more social pressure. You also realize that there's no such thing as breaking in these shoes. They're just uncomfortable from day one. You feel every pebble and every bit of uneven ground through the thin soles. There are no sneakers or comfortable walking shoes here, just leather sacks for your feet. You're also adorned with a number of accessories. There's a heavy jeweled belt at your waist, a ring on every finger, and maybe a brooch or two on your chest. For a queen, this might also include a heavy headdress and a veil. The weight of all this is starting to get to you. You feel a constant, low-grade exhaustion just from carrying your own clothes. You can't imagine what it would be like to ride a horse in all this. Historians still argue whether the extreme weight and impracticality of royal clothing contributed to the often sedentary lifestyles of the nobility, or if it was simply a symbol of a life where physical labor was not a concern. You're starting to think it's a bit of both. You're a walking, talking display of wealth and power, but at the cost of comfort and mobility. Every step you take is a small, conscious effort. It's a lot of work just to look the part. As you've just been laced into a particularly constricting velvet surcoat, a young page arrives with a message. It's not about a new treaty or an uprising in the north, it's about a marriage. Your marriage. You're reminded that your life, even your most personal relationships, isn't really your own. A mainstream historical fact is that most royal marriages in the Middle Ages were arranged for political or economic reasons, often to secure alliances, end conflicts, or consolidate power and land. The notion of marrying for love was, for the most part, a foreign concept. Your future spouse is likely someone you've never met, and they may be from a rival kingdom or a powerful noble family. The person you will share your bed with and have your children with is a strategic asset. A living treaty. The process is more like a negotiation than a courtship. Envoys are sent between courts, and the terms of the marriage contract are meticulously drawn up. The dowry, the wealth and property the bride brings to the marriage, is a major point of discussion. The promise of future heirs is another. You might be just a teenager, But the weight of your entire dynasty rests on your ability to produce an heir. This pressure is immense, especially for a king. Imagine the pressure of knowing that your kingdom's future depends entirely on whether or not you can produce a healthy male child. A quirky tidbit about this is the practice of proxy marriages. If one of the parties couldn't travel for the ceremony, a stand-in would be used. In a famous example, the proxy for a royal groom would sometimes even be required to lie in bed with the bride, with a sword placed between them, to symbolically complete the marriage and ensure the consummation was witnessed. It sounds bizarre, but it was a very serious legal and political ritual. It shows just how little personal freedom you had. Even your wedding night was a public, and very symbolic, affair. There was nothing private about it. Love, of course, did happen. There are stories of kings and queens who genuinely fell for their spouses. And sometimes, those feelings blossomed into real affection. But that was a happy accident, not the primary goal. Your duty is to your lineage and your kingdom, not to your heart. You might feel a deep sadness about this, to be surrounded by so many people, yet to feel so alone in your most personal choices. You might also find yourself wondering what your future spouse is like. Are they kind? Cruel? Are they beautiful or plain? You won't know until it's too late to back out. Historians still argue whether the lack of personal choice in marriage and other areas of life led to the higher rates of infidelity and court intrigue among the nobility, or if these were simply a byproduct of the power and privilege that came with the title. Was it a rebellion against a life of duty, or just a natural consequence of having so much freedom in all other respects? You're starting to think it's a bit of both. You are a living symbol, a tool of statecraft, and your heart is not part of the equation. The political marriage has been arranged. The papers are signed, and now it's time for a celebration. And what better way to celebrate and prove your military might than with a tournament? You're in the stands, watching the pageantry unfold, but you're also keenly aware of the risks involved. A mainstream historical fact is that tournaments, particularly jousting, were incredibly dangerous, resulting in frequent injuries and sometimes death. Despite the heavy armor and rules of chivalry, they were a mix of sport, military training, and high-stakes entertainment. The crowd is roaring, the heralds are sounding their trumpets, and the knights are charging, lances leveled. You're watching two knights charge at each other, and you can hear the bone-shattering crack as their lances meet shields. One knight is unseated and falls to the ground in a heap. The crowd cheers. He's alive, but you can see that he's not getting up quickly. The armor, as heavy as it is, doesn't always protect against the blunt force trauma of a full-speed charge. You're holding your breath with every collision. It's a brutal sport, and it's meant to be. The point isn't just to win, it's to display your strength, courage, and skill. You know that a good showing here can earn a knight favor with a king or queen, and a bad showing can end a career, or a life. A quirky tidbit is the practice of tourney, which was an all-out, no-holds-barred melee that sometimes took place after the jousting. It was essentially a mock battle involving dozens of knights. The objective was to capture and ransom your opponents, which was a very profitable business. It was also, as you can imagine, a complete mess of mud, broken lances, and flying armor. It wasn't about a graceful, one-on-one duel. It was a chaotic, often bloody free-for-all. It was more about surviving than about winning. A brutal reality that underscores the thin line between sport and war in this time. Your role as a royal in all this is to be a spectator and a patron. You're there to lend legitimacy to the event and to reward the victors. You're also there to be seen, to show off your own finery, and to be a visible symbol of power. But you can't help but feel a sense of dread as you watch. You've seen men get seriously injured, and you've heard whispers of men who never walked away. You're reminded that your power, and your life, is ultimately protected by men who are willing to risk theirs for your favor. It's a heavy thought. Historians still argue whether the chivalric codes and tournaments of the Middle Ages were a genuine effort to civilize warfare, or if they were just a violent and theatrical way for the nobility to burn off energy and show off their wealth and power. Were they a step toward a more civilized society, or just a glorified form of fighting? As you watch another knight get pulled from the field, you're not sure you see the difference. Now that you've watched men get broken, you're reminded that the human body is fragile, even with all that armor. Which brings us to medieval medicine, a subject that will either make you cringe or just shake your head in disbelief. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval medical practices were a bizarre and often dangerous mix of herbal remedies, spiritual beliefs, and surgical procedures performed without any understanding of germs or sanitation. You've got a small cut on your hand from a rogue splinter, and a barber surgeon is called to tend to it. This is a person who isn't just a doctor, they also cut hair and, yes, perform minor surgeries. You'd think the two professions were unrelated. But hey, it's a living. The barber surgeon arrives with a pouch full of instruments that look more like torture devices than healing tools. There are rusted knives, crude forceps, and a variety of mysterious tinctures. He inspects your cut and nods sagely. He's going to treat it with a poultice made from a mixture of herbs and something else. You're not sure you want to know. He tells you to hold still, and he slathers the concoction onto your hand. It smells earthy. The pain of the cut is still there, but now you have a new sensation, an odd tingling and a slight burning. You're just hoping it's a good kind of burning. A quirky tidbit about medieval medicine is the use of animal dung in remedies. For example, crocodile dung was sometimes used as a treatment for freckles, and dog hair was a common ingredient in some wound dressings. You're just praying that your poultice doesn't contain either of those things. The logic behind it was often based on the principle of like cures like, or simply on superstitions that had been passed down for generations. The idea of a placebo effect probably wasn't lost on them either, since many people believed that if you had faith in the remedy, it would work. You're thinking about the crocodile dung sunscreen and you're just glad your ailment isn't a cosmetic one. Then there's the big one, bloodletting. This was a common practice for almost any ailment. The belief was that disease was caused by an imbalance of the four humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. To cure an ailment, you simply needed to restore the balance. And the easiest way to do that was to remove some blood. So, if you had a fever, they would cut you and let some blood out. If you had a bad mood, they would cut you and let some blood out. It was a one-size-fits-all solution, and it was often performed with leeches or with a small knife. Historians still argue whether this practice did more harm than good, as it often weakened an already sick person and made them more susceptible to infection. You're watching the barber surgeon put away his tools, and you're just thankful your cut wasn't serious enough to warrant a bloodletting. You're told to keep your hand clean, and you wonder how that's going to work when you haven't had a proper bath in weeks. It's a miracle anyone survived. With your hand treated, or at least covered in a questionable poultice, it's time to move. You're not staying in one castle all year. The royal court is a traveling circus, constantly on the move from one manor to another, or from one city to the next. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval royalty and their courts were almost always on the move, traveling vast distances to assert their authority, manage their lands, and simply to avoid depleting the resources of a single location. It was a way of life, a constant state of motion. Your journey is not a leisurely one. You're traveling in a royal procession, which is a slow-moving, massive undertaking. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of people with you, knights, servants, courtiers, cooks, and a mountain of baggage. The roads are not paved. They're muddy, rutted tracks that turn into impassable bogs in the rain. Your carriage is a jolting, bumpy box on wheels that has no suspension. You are thrown from side to side with every bump and dip. You feel every single rock. It's a miracle you don't get whiplash. The journey is exhausting, and it takes days, or even weeks, to travel a distance that a modern car could cover in a few hours. The perils of the road are many. There's the risk of robbers, though you're surrounded by armed guards, which makes it less likely. There's the risk of illness, a constant fear in this time. And there's the risk of simply getting stuck. A quirky tidbit is that when a royal procession got stuck in the mud, it was often the peasants and villagers from nearby who were conscripted to pull the carriages free. It was a mandatory service to your lord or king, and it was a grueling, dirty job. You might see a dozen men straining and groaning just to move your carriage a few feet. It's a vivid reminder of the social hierarchy in action. You are literally being carried by the labor of the people you rule. Sometimes the journey is a pilgrimage, a trip to a holy site. These journeys are often made on foot, or on horseback for the royalty, and they are a mix of piety and politics. You're there to be seen, to show your devotion to God, and to solidify your status as a divinely appointed ruler. But it's still a journey filled with the same discomforts as any other. The food is often just what can be foraged or bought along the way. And the sleeping arrangements are far from a comfortable bedchamber. You might be sleeping in a monastery, or even a simple inn. Historians still argue whether the constant travel and the physical toll it took on the nobility contributed to their often shorter lifespans, or if it was simply a necessary evil of a land-based, pre-industrial society. You're feeling the physical toll right now. Your back aches, your head is pounding, and you can't wait for this long, bumpy, and surprisingly smelly journey to finally be over. You've finally arrived at the next castle, and after shaking off the dust and aches of the road, you're plunged back into the swirling life of the court. This isn't just your family and servants. The royal court is a living, breathing ecosystem of dozens, sometimes hundreds, of individuals, each with their own role to play. A mainstream historical fact is that the medieval royal court was a complex social structure composed of a vast array of people, from high-ranking nobles and clerics to spies, jesters, and everyday servants, all vying for power and influence. It was a theatrical and often treacherous world. And you are the star of the show. You're surrounded by your inner circle. There are the great lords and ladies who hold powerful positions, the barons and dukes. But they're not just friends. They're rivals, potential conspirators, and powerful allies. They might be smiling and bowing to you, but you know that beneath the surface, they're watching your every move, calculating their next step. Then there are the clerics, the bishops and abbots, who hold immense spiritual and political power. They are your spiritual advisors, but they also have their own agenda, and they're not afraid to use the power of the church to get what they want. But let's talk about the more unusual characters. There's the jester, or fool. Their job isn't just to tell jokes. They are one of the few people in the court who can speak the truth to power without being punished. A quirky tidbit about jesters is that they were often highly intelligent and witty individuals who used their humor to offer sharp social and political commentary. They could get away with saying things that would earn a lord a trip to the dungeon. They were the court's conscience, its outlet for dissent, and its social critic all rolled into one. You might find yourself relying on the jester's dry wit to understand the real mood of the court. Then there are the spies. Not the James Bond kind, but subtle, quiet people whose loyalty is to you alone. They're a necessary evil. You can't trust everyone, and a good spy can alert you to a potential plot or a brewing conspiracy before it's too late. You might have a subtle signal with your master of spies, a certain look or a particular phrase. That tells you need a private meeting. The constant paranoia is exhausting. You can't tell who is a friend and who is an enemy. The court is a place of whispers and rumors, of secret alliances and hidden daggers. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of spies and informants in medieval courts made them more secure or if it simply created a culture of paranoia and distrust that made everyone's life miserable. You're starting to think it's the latter. Every meal could be poisoned. Every handshake could be a sign of a secret plot. You're a person of power, but you're also completely vulnerable. The court is a battlefield of power, but it's also a place of deep faith. Your life as a royal is inextricably linked with the church. A mainstream historical fact is that religion was not a separate part of life for medieval royalty. It was central to their identity and their legitimacy to rule, with daily religious observance being a mandatory part of their routine. You're expected to attend Mass every morning, and sometimes multiple times a day. It's not an optional activity. You are the divine representative on earth, and you must show your piety at all times. You're at Mass in the royal chapel. The air is thick with the scent of incense, and the stone walls are cool. The priest is chanting in Latin, a language you now understand, and the service is long and ritualized. You're kneeling on a hard stone floor, your knees starting to ache. You're told this is part of your sacrifice, a small physical discomfort for the salvation of your soul and the well-being of your kingdom. After the service, you might be expected to give alms to the poor who gather outside the castle gates. This isn't just an act of charity, it's a public display of your generosity and your connection to the common people. A quirky tidbit is the belief in the royal touch. It was widely believed that a king or queen, by divine right, had the power to heal certain diseases, particularly a skin condition known as scrofula, or the king's evil. The sick would line up, sometimes for miles, to be touched by the monarch. You would have to touch each person. Maybe give them a coin. And say a prayer over them. It was a physically and emotionally draining experience. And you're not sure if it actually worked. But the people's faith in your ability to heal was a powerful tool of statecraft. It showed that you weren't just a political leader, but a sacred figure. Your relationship with the church is a delicate balance of power. The Pope in Rome holds immense authority. And a disagreement with him could lead to excommunication, which would strip you of your divine right to rule and potentially turn your subjects against you. You are constantly negotiating with bishops and abbots, seeking their counsel, and trying to keep them on your side. Historians still argue whether the church's immense power was a stabilizing force that prevented medieval rulers from becoming total despots, or if it was a source of constant conflict and a check on their power that often led to political instability. You're trying to figure out if your priest is a spiritual guide or a political player. It's probably both. You're a spiritual leader, a political figure, and a soldier all at once. And it's a lot to keep straight. With your daily spiritual duties complete, you're free to pursue some recreation. But your downtime isn't like the modern concept of leisure. It's often a mix of status symbols and bizarre hobbies. A mainstream historical fact is that the pastimes of medieval royalty were not just for fun, they were a display of wealth, power, and often involved the collection of rare or exotic animals. You might have a menagerie. Not a small one, but a collection of wild and unusual beasts brought to you from far-flung lands. Imagine being a king and having your very own lion or bear in a cage in the courtyard. It's a statement. A quirky tidbit is the practice of keeping monkeys as pets. They were a symbol of wealth and exotic taste. And it was a bit of a fad among the nobility. You might see a tiny monkey scurrying across the floor of the Great Hall or clinging to the shoulder of a noblewoman. Of course, keeping a wild animal in a castle isn't the safest or smartest idea. They're often destructive, smelly, and can be dangerous. You've just watched a servant try to retrieve a piece of a tapestry that a mischievous monkey has torn down. It's a chaotic scene, but no one seems too bothered. This is just a part of life. Another popular pastime was board games. But not the kind you're used to. They were often complex, strategic games like chess or tables, a predecessor to backgammon. These were not just a way to pass the time. They were a way to practice your military and political strategy in a safe environment. You're playing a game of chess with a visiting lord, and every move you make is a microcosm of a larger battle. You're watching his face, trying to read his intentions, just as you would in a real negotiation. The game is a proxy for the very real conflicts you'll face. Then there are games of chance. Dice were a very popular pastime, and a lot of money could change hands on a single roll. You're watching some of your knights and courtiers playing a game of dice. And the tension is palpable. The stakes are high. One bad roll could mean the loss of a whole estate or a year's income. It's a reminder that even in your free time, the shadow of risk and competition is always present. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of gambling among the nobility was a sign of their boredom and lack of purpose, or if it was simply a natural outgrowth of a high stakes, all-or-nothing society where everything from a battle to a marriage was a gamble. You're not sure which is true, but you can feel the excitement and the danger in the air. A sense of nervous energy that permeates even the quietest moments of the court. You realize that a lot of these pastimes aren't about relaxation at all. They're just another way to prove your dominance and test your luck. The games of chance and the jester's wit are a brief respite from the ever-present tension of court life. Because for all the power you possess, you're constantly living with a quiet, gnawing fear, the fear of being overthrown. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval royalty lived under a constant threat of assassination, coup d'état, and rebellion, making security and paranoia a defining feature of their lives. Your enemies aren't just foreign kings, they're your own nobles, your family members, and even your closest advisors. You're walking through a narrow stone corridor, and you notice the guards. They're everywhere. They're posted at every door, in every hallway, and at every gate. They're not just there to keep out the common people, they're also watching each other. You have a special set of tasters for your food and drink. Before you take a single bite or sip, a servant consumes a portion of it to ensure it isn't poisoned. It's a sobering reality. You're the most important person in the kingdom, but you can't even eat a meal without someone else trying it first. A quirky tidbit is the use of secret passages and hiding places in castles. Many medieval castles were designed with hidden corridors, secret rooms, and escape routes. These weren't just for show, they were a necessary part of a ruler's defense plan. In the event of a siege or an attack, you would have a way to escape to a safer part of the castle, or even to a secret exit. It's a bit like living in a spy movie, except the stakes are real and there are no credits at the end. You might have a favorite hiding place, a small chamber with a secret door, that you would retreat to when you felt particularly unsafe. The plots against you are real. There are whispered conversations in dark corners of the hall. There are letters passed in secret. And there are your own relatives, who might believe they have a better claim to the throne than you do. You might have a cousin or an uncle who is just waiting for the right moment to strike. You're constantly weighing who you can trust. Was that lord's laugh a little too loud? Was that a strange look the chamberlain just gave you? Every gesture, every word, every silence is a potential clue. Historians still argue whether the extreme levels of paranoia among medieval rulers were a justified response to a genuinely dangerous world, or if it was a self-fulfilling prophecy, where the fear of betrayal led to the very actions that caused it. You're starting to believe it was a little of both. It's an exhausting way to live. You're never truly safe. You're constantly on alert, listening for the sounds of a coup, and hoping your security is as good as you think it is. You've managed to avoid a dagger in the back and a poisoned chalice for a while. But there's another constant source of stress that can bring a kingdom to its knees: money. Or, more accurately, the lack of it. A mainstream historical fact is that managing the royal treasury in the Middle Ages was a constant struggle. As rulers had to fund lavish lifestyles, massive building projects, and, most importantly, endless wars, with a limited and often unreliable stream of income. Your royal court is a very expensive operation. All those servants, the knights, the cooks, the jesters, the guards, they all need to be paid. Your castles need to be maintained, and new ones need to be built. Your main sources of income are taxes, tolls, and rents from your lands. But it's not like the money just shows up in a bank account. It has to be collected, often by force, from a population that is largely poor and, let's be honest, not thrilled about paying it. A quirky tidbit is the use of tally sticks for accounting. They were notched pieces of wood used to record debts and payments. One half of the stick was given to the person who paid the money, and the other half was kept by the royal treasury. The notches on both halves had to match perfectly to prove the debt was paid. It's a bit like a medieval version of a receipt, but it shows just how basic the financial system was. It was a physical, tangible way of keeping track of money, and it was the best they had. The biggest drain on your treasury, however, is war. Armies are not cheap. The knights need armor, weapons, and horses, and they expect to be paid for their service. The foot soldiers need to be fed and equipped. Sieges are incredibly expensive, and even a short campaign can bankrupt a kingdom. You're constantly having to figure out how to raise more money. You might have to levy new taxes, demand a loan from a wealthy merchant, or even confiscate the property of a disloyal noble. It's a bit like playing a real-life strategy game where you're always in the red, and every choice has a consequence. Historians still argue whether the constant state of war in the Middle Ages was a direct result of the difficulty of raising money, with rulers needing to expand their territories to find new sources of revenue, or if it was simply a byproduct of the power struggles that defined the era. You're not sure of the answer, but you do know that your treasury is always a topic of concern. You might be a king or a queen, but you're also a very stressed-out accountant. Your reign, like all things, will come to an end. All the feasts, the wars, the intrigues, and the discomforts are leading to this final, inevitable act. A mainstream historical fact is that the death of a medieval monarch was a pivotal and often precarious event, as it triggered the complex and frequently violent process of succession, which could plunge a kingdom into civil war. It's not a quiet, private moment. Your death is a public and political affair. As your health declines, the vultures begin to gather. Your rivals, your family members, and your ambitious lords are all waiting, watching, and plotting. Your last days are spent not just with family and priests, but also with your chief advisors. There are final decrees to be made, final words to be spoken, and final attempts to secure the throne for your chosen heir. It's a race against time, a final chess game with the highest stakes. You're trying to outmaneuver your enemies even from your deathbed. The air in your bedchamber is thick with tension and whispered conspiracies. You might have a son, a daughter, a nephew, or a cousin who is already making plans to seize power. A quirky tidbit is the belief in the touch of the dying king. It was sometimes believed that a final touch from the dying monarch could still heal the sick. And some people would try to get close to the deathbed for one last chance at a miracle. It's a bit ghoulish, but it shows just how much power was believed to be vested in the royal person. Even in their final moments, your body isn't just a physical shell, it's a sacred vessel of divine authority. And the transfer of that authority is a tumultuous and dangerous process. Then, there's the issue of your burial. You won't just be laid to rest in the ground. You'll be entombed in a grand sarcophagus in a cathedral, a permanent monument to your power. But even that isn't simple. Your body might be embalmed, a messy and primitive process, to make the long journey to your final resting place. And your heart might be removed and buried in a separate location, often a different church or monastery. A practice that was a very real part of royal funerals. It was a symbolic gesture, a way to spread your spiritual influence even after death. Historians still argue whether the elaborate rituals surrounding royal death and burial were a genuine expression of piety, or if they were a calculated performance designed to ensure a smooth transition of power and to legitimize the new ruler. You're too tired to care. The finality of it all is setting in. All the wealth, the power, the feasts, and the discomforts are fading away. And all that's left is the legacy you leave behind and the chaos you've likely created for your successors to clean up. The journey is over now. The clanking of armor has faded. The echoes of the great hall have gone silent. And the musty scent of the castle is just a memory. You're no longer shivering in a cold chamber or picking fleas from your clothes. The heavy layers of wool and velvet have been set aside. The sounds of the jester and the tournament have been replaced by a soft, steady quiet. All of that is a long time ago. Let go of the worries of a world you'll never truly know. Let the images fade, one by one. The flickering candles, the rough stone walls, the lumpy bed. Just let them all dissolve into the darkness behind your eyelids. Your body is warm, your bed is soft, and your mind is at ease. There are no plots, no feasting, no cold stone corridors, just peace. There is nothing to do now but rest. Nothing to think about but a gentle hum. Nothing to feel but the slow, even rhythm of your own breath. You're safe. You're home. Good night.